Hey there, you're looking kind of cute. Don't forget to subscribe and check out all my other socials. Enjoy. The sun dipped below the horizon. Ezra stood before the full-length mirror. His fingers trembled slightly as he smoothed down the emerald green dress, and the long brunette wig cascaded over his shoulders in soft waves. "You look beautiful, darling." Madeline's voice came from behind him, warm and encouraging. She appeared in the mirror's reflection, a small smile playing on her lips as she approached. Her delicate hands reached up to adjust the wig slightly, tucking a stray strand behind Ezra's ear. Ezra's heart swelled with love and gratitude for his wife. "Thank you, Maddie. I don't know what I'd do without your support." Madeline's eyes crinkled at the corners as her smile widened. "I love seeing you happy, Ezra. I just wish..." Her voice trailed off, and a familiar shadow of worry crossed her features. Ezra turned to face her, taking her hands in his. "I know, love. I understand why we can't go out like this. Your work, your friends. I get it." Madeline squeezed his hands, her expression a mix of love and regret. "I'm sorry. I wish things were different. But you know how judgmental my colleagues can be. If they found out..." "Shh," Ezra soothed, pulling her into a gentle embrace. "It's okay. This is enough. Being able to be myself at home with you means everything to me." As they held each other, Ezra couldn't help but feel a pang of longing. He loved these moments of freedom, of finally feeling like his true self, but a small part of him yearned to experience that feeling beyond the confines of their home. Later that evening, as Madeline prepared for bed, Ezra sat at the vanity, carefully removing his makeup. His mind wandered to the upcoming theater performance he'd been dying to see. A local production of Chicago was playing for a limited run, and he'd always loved the glitz and glamour of that particular musical. An idea began to form in his mind. It was risky, perhaps even foolish, but the temptation was overwhelming. He glanced at Madeline's sleeping form, guilt gnawing at him, even as excitement bubbled up inside. The next day, while Madeline was at work, Ezra made his preparations. He chose a sophisticated black cocktail dress from the collection they'd amassed over the years, pairing it with tasteful jewelry and a pair of low heels he could walk comfortably in. He spent hours perfecting his makeup, contouring his face to soften his features and accentuate his cheekbones. As the hour of the performance approached, Ezra's nerves were on edge. He left a note for Madeline, claiming he was meeting an old college friend for drinks. The lie tasted bitter on his tongue, but the thrill of what he was about to do overshadowed his guilt. The theater was buzzing with excitement as Ezra approached. He'd chosen a seat near the back, hoping to remain as inconspicuous as possible. His heart raced as he presented his ticket and made his way inside, hyper-aware of every glance in his direction. To his immense relief, no one seemed to give him a second look. He was just another woman out for an evening at the theater. The realization was intoxicating, and Ezra found himself relaxing as he settled into his seat. The performance was everything he'd hoped for, and more. The music, the costumes, the sheer energy of it all swept him away. For those few hours, Ezra forgot about his deception, lost in the magic of the show. As the final notes faded and the audience erupted into applause, Ezra rose to his feet, clapping enthusiastically. It was then that he heard a familiar voice behind him. Jane Thompson, is that you?" Ezra froze, his blood turning to ice in his veins. Slowly, he turned to face the source of the voice, coming face to face with Linda, one of Madeline's co-workers. Linda beamed at him, clearly delighted by the chance encounter. "I thought that was you! What a lovely surprise! I didn't know you were a fan of musical theater." Ezra's mind raced, panic threatening to overwhelm him. In a split-second decision, he decided to play along, praying his voice wouldn't betray him. "Linda, how wonderful to see you," he replied, pitching his voice slightly higher than usual. "Yes, I absolutely adore musicals. Wasn't the show just fabulous?" To his amazement, Linda didn't seem to notice anything amiss. They chatted amiably about the performance as they made their way out of the theater, Ezra's heart pounding so loudly he was sure Linda must hear it. We simply must get together soon, Linda gushed as they reached the street. Perhaps you, me, and Madeline could do lunch next week? I know she's been so busy lately, it would be nice to catch up. Ezra nodded, forcing a smile. That sounds lovely. I'll check with Madeline and get back to you. As Linda hailed a taxi, Ezra breathed a sigh of relief. He'd made it through the encounter without raising suspicion, but now he faced a new problem. How to explain this to Madeline? The drive home was a blur of anxiety and conflicting emotions. On one hand, Ezra felt exhilarated by his successful outing. On the other, guilt and fear gnawed at him. How could he have been so reckless? Madeline was waiting up for him when he arrived home, concern etched on her face. Ezra, is everything all right? You look pale. Ezra took a deep breath, steeling himself for the conversation ahead. Maddie, we need to talk. Something happened tonight, and I need to tell you everything. Over the next hour, Ezra recounted the events of the evening. Madeline listened in stunned silence, her expression unreadable. When he finished, Ezra braced himself for her anger, her disappointment. To his surprise, Madeline burst out laughing. Oh, Ezra, she managed between fits of giggles. Only you could get yourself into a situation like this. Ezra blinked, unsure how to respond. You're not angry? Madeline's laughter subsided, and she took his hands in hers. I'm not thrilled that you went behind my back, but I understand why you did it. And I have to admit, the idea of you fooling Linda is rather amusing. Relief washed over Ezra, and he pulled Madeline into a tight embrace. I'm so sorry, love. I promise it won't happen again. Madeline pulled back slightly, a thoughtful expression on her face. Actually, maybe it should. What do you mean? Ezra asked, confusion evident in his voice. A mischievous glint appeared in Madeline's eyes. Well, it seems you've inadvertently created an alter ego. Jane Thompson, Madeline's dear friend from out of town. Perhaps we could use this to our advantage? Ezra's eyes widened as he began to understand. You mean, go out together? With me as Jane? Madeline nodded, a smile spreading across her face. It would allow you the freedom to be yourself in public without risking my career or our social standing. We'd have to be careful, of course, but it could work. Ezra's heart soared at the possibility. Are you sure about this, Maddie? It's a big risk. I'm sure, Madeline replied, her voice firm. I love you, Ezra. All of you, and I want you to be happy. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of planning and preparation. Madeline helped Ezra refine his Jane persona, working on mannerisms and backstory. They carefully selected outfits and accessories that would suit Jane's style while ensuring Ezra's comfort. Their first outing as Madeline and Jane was to a small cafe on the outskirts of town. Ezra's nerves were on edge as they entered, but Madeline's reassuring presence helped calm him. As they settled into their seats, Madeline reached across the table to squeeze Ezra's hand. Relax, Jane, she said, loud enough for nearby patrons to hear. You look lovely. No one's going to suspect a thing. Ezra took a deep breath, allowing himself to slip into the role of Jane. Thanks, Maddie. I'm just a bit nervous about meeting your friends later. They spent the next hour chatting and laughing, playing the part of two close friends catching up. To Ezra's delight, not a single person gave them a second glance. As they left the cafe, Ezra felt a newfound confidence. That wasn't so bad, was it? Madeline said with a grin. Ezra shook his head, a wide smile on his face. It was wonderful. Thank you for this, Maddie. You have no idea how much it means to me. Over the next few months, Madeline and Jane became a common sight around town. They went shopping, attended art exhibitions, and even joined Madeline's book club. Ezra flourished in his role as Jane, reveling in the freedom to express himself openly. Of course, there were close calls, like the time they ran into Madeline's boss at a restaurant, and Ezra had to think quickly to explain why Jane was so knowledgeable about Madeline's work projects. Or the afternoon at the park when a strong gust of wind nearly dislodged Ezra's wig. But with each successful outing, their confidence grew. Madeleine found herself enjoying the secret they shared, the thrill of their little deception. And Ezra? Ezra was happier than he'd ever been. One sunny Saturday afternoon, as they strolled through a local farmer's market, Madeline turned to Ezra with a mischievous glint in her eye. "You know, Jane, I've been thinking we should host a dinner party." Ezra nearly dropped the basket of apples he was holding. "A dinner party? Maddie, are you sure that's a good idea?" Madeline nodded enthusiastically. "Think about it. It would be the ultimate test. If we can pull that off, we can handle anything." The idea was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Ezra bit his lip, considering the risks. "Who would we invite?" "Just a small group," Madeline replied. "Linda and her husband, maybe my colleague Thomas and his wife. People who've met Jane before, but not for extended periods." Ezra took a deep breath, steeling his nerves. "Okay," he said finally. "Let's do it." The next 2 weeks were a flurry of activity as they prepared for the dinner party. Madeline handled the invitations and menu planning, while Ezra focused on perfecting his Jane persona for a longer, more intimate gathering. The night of the party arrived, and Ezra found himself pacing nervously in the bedroom as Madeline put the finishing touches on the table settings downstairs. "You can do this," he muttered to himself, smoothing down the fabric of the elegant navy blue dress he'd chosen for the evening. "You are Jane Thompson, Madeline's confident, charming friend." The doorbell rang, and Ezra's heart leapt into his throat. With one final glance in the mirror, he made his way downstairs to greet their guests. The evening started off smoothly. Linda and her husband arrived first, followed shortly by Thomas and his wife Sarah. Ezra slipped easily into the role of gracious co-host, serving drinks and making small talk as Madeline put the final touches on dinner. As they settled around the dining table, Ezra felt a surge of confidence. He was pulling this off. He was Jane, and no one suspected a thing. The conversation flowed freely as they enjoyed Madeline's excellent cooking. Ezra found himself regaling the group with stories of his and Madeline's supposed college days, carefully crafted anecdotes they'd prepared in advance. "Oh, Jane," Linda laughed, wiping tears of mirth from her eyes. "You simply must tell them about the time we all went skinny dipping in the lake." Ezra froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. This wasn't part of their prepared stories. He glanced at Madeline, panic rising in his chest. To his relief, Madeline smoothly intervened. "Now, Linda, I don't think that's an appropriate dinner table story. Besides, I'm sure Jane would rather forget that particular adventure." The group laughed, and the moment passed. Ezra shot Madeline a grateful look, marveling at her quick thinking. As the evening wore on, Ezra found himself relaxing more and more. He was enjoying the companionship, the easy banter. For a few blissful hours, he wasn't pretending. He was simply being himself, accepted and appreciated by this group of friends. It wasn't until the guests had left and he and Madeline were cleaning up that the magnitude of what they'd accomplished hit him. "We did it," he said softly, setting down the glass he'd been drying. "Maddie, we really did it." Madeline came up behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "You were amazing, darling. I'm so proud of you." Ezra turned in her embrace, tears pricking at the corners of his eyes. "Thank you for everything, for accepting me, for supporting me, for loving all of me." Madeline reached up to cup his face, her eyes shining with love. "Always, Ezra. You're my husband, my best friend, and now," she added with a grin, "my glamorous gal pal. I wouldn't have it any other way." As they stood there in their kitchen, holding each other close, Ezra felt a sense of peace wash over him. He had found a way to be true to himself while keeping the life he loved with Madeline. It wasn't perfect, and there would always be challenges, but in that moment, he knew that together, they could face anything. The success of the dinner party marked a turning point for Ezra and Madeline. What had started as a risky experiment had blossomed into a new way of life, one that allowed Ezra to express his true self while maintaining the life he and Madeline had built together. Over the next year, Jane became an integral part of their social circle. She was the life of every party, always ready with a witty comment or a sympathetic ear. Ezra found himself looking forward to these outings, no longer feeling like he was playing a role, but simply being another facet of himself. Madeline, too, found unexpected joy in their arrangement. She loved watching Ezra bloom into confidence, and she had to admit having a best friend who truly understood her was wonderful. They would often spend hours getting ready together, giggling like schoolgirls as they tried on outfits and shared makeup tips. Of course, there were still moments of tension and fear, like the day Ezra, dressed as Jane, bumped into one of his male colleagues at the grocery store. His heart had nearly stopped, but he'd managed to breeze past with a polite nod, praying the man wouldn't recognize him. Or the time Madeline's mother had shown up for a surprise visit while Ezra was mid-transformation. They'd had to hastily hide all evidence of Jane and come up with a plausible excuse for the long brunette hair Ezra hadn't had time to remove. But these close calls only served to bring Ezra and Madeline closer together. They became experts at thinking on their feet, always ready with a quick explanation or distraction. It was like they were part of an elaborate, ongoing performance, and they were the only two who knew the script. As their comfort with the situation grew, so did their ambitions. They started venturing further afield, taking weekend trips to nearby cities where they could be themselves without fear of running into anyone they knew. It was on one of these trips, as they strolled hand in hand through a bustling art gallery, that Ezra had an epiphany. "Maddie," he said, squeezing her hand to get her attention, I think I want to tell someone. About me, about Jane, about all of it." Madeline looked at him, surprise evident in her eyes. "Are you sure? Who were you thinking of telling?" Ezra took a deep breath. "Your sister Claire. She's always been so open-minded and supportive, and I think it would be good to have someone else know, someone we could trust completely." Madeline was quiet for a moment, considering. Then she nodded slowly. "I think you're right. Claire would understand, and it would be nice to have someone to confide in, someone who could help cover for us if needed." The decision made, they spent the rest of their trip planning how to approach Claire. They agreed that honesty was the best policy, no more deception, no more half-truths. They would lay it all out and hope for the best. A week later, they invited Claire over for dinner. Ezra was a bundle of nerves as they prepared the meal together, second-guessing their decision with every passing minute. What if she reacts badly? He fretted, chopping vegetables with shaking hands. What if she tells someone else? Madeline gently took the knife from him before he could hurt himself. Claire loves us both. She might be shocked at first, but she'll come around. And we know we can trust her to keep our secret. When Claire arrived, they made small talk over appetizers, the atmosphere tense with unspoken words. Finally, as they settled in the living room with after-dinner coffee, Madeline took a deep breath and began. "Claire, there's something Ezra and I need to tell you. It's not easy to explain, but we trust you and we need you to understand." Claire leaned forward, concern etched on her face. "You're scaring me a little here, sis. What's going on?" Ezra and Madeline exchanged a look, and then Ezra spoke. "Claire, you've met our friend Jane, right?" Claire nodded, confusion evident in her expression. "Yes, of course. Lovely woman. Why?" "Well," Ezra continued, his voice shaking slightly, "the thing is, I'm Jane." There was a moment of stunned silence as Claire processed this information. Then, to everyone's surprise, she burst out laughing. "Oh my God," she wheezed between giggles. "I can't believe I never noticed." "It's so obvious now that you've said it." Ezra and Madeline exchanged bewildered glances. This was not the reaction they'd been expecting. As Claire's laughter subsided, she wiped tears from her eyes and looked at them both with a warm smile. "I'm sorry, I don't mean to laugh. It's just, it explains so much. Like why Jane always seemed to know exactly what to say to make me feel better, just like you do, Ezra." She reached out and took one of each of their hands. "Thank you for trusting me with this. I'm honored, truly. And I want you both to know that I love you, and this doesn't change anything." The relief that washed over Ezra was almost physical. He felt tears pricking at the corners of his eyes as he squeezed Claire's hand. "Thank you," he whispered. "You have no idea how much that means to us." The rest of the evening was spent explaining their arrangement to Claire, who listened with rapt attention and asked thoughtful questions. By the time she left, Ezra felt as though a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. They had an ally, someone who understood and accepted them completely. In the weeks that followed, having Claire in on their secret proved to be a blessing. She was always ready with a clever excuse if someone questioned Jane's absence from an event or Ezra's presence when Jane was supposed to be in town. She even helped them come up with new ideas for outings and activities that would allow Ezra to be Jane more often. As the months passed, Ezra found himself settling into a comfortable rhythm. He was Ezra at work and with his male friends. Jane went out with Madeline and their social circle, and a blend of both at home. It wasn't always easy, and there were still moments of fear and doubt, but overall, he felt more at peace with himself than he ever had before. One evening, as he and Madeline were getting ready for bed, Ezra turned to his wife with a serious expression. "Maddie, I've been thinking about the future." Madeline sat down on the edge of the bed, giving him her full attention. "What about it, love?" Ezra took a deep breath. "I love our life. I love being able to be Jane sometimes, to express that side of myself. But I've realized something. I don't want to transition fully. I'm happy being Ezra too. I want to be able to be both." Madeline nodded slowly, a small smile playing on her lips. "I think I understand. You want the freedom to express yourself however you feel on any given day without having to choose one identity permanently." "Exactly," Ezra said, relief evident in his voice. Is that okay with you?" Madeline stood and wrapped her arms around him. "Of course it is, darling. I love you, all of you. Ezra, Jane, and everyone in between. As long as you're happy and true to yourself, that's all that matters to me." Ezra held her tight, overwhelmed with love and gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair, "for everything. For loving me, for accepting me, for going on this crazy journey with me." Madeline pulled back slightly, her eyes shining with affection. "Always, my love, always." Ezra and Madeline's life had settled into a rhythm that felt both exhilarating and comforting. The dual existence of Ezra and Jane had become a dance they performed with grace, each step carefully choreographed to balance their love, their secret, and their public lives. Ezra cherished the moments he could slip into Jane's persona, feeling the soft fabric of a dress against his skin, the weight of a wig framing his face, and the freedom to express a part of himself he'd hidden for so long. Madeline, ever his rock, had embraced this journey with him, her love unwavering as she helped him navigate this complex duality. But as the months passed, something subtle began to shift in Madeline's gaze. It wasn't just pride or affection that lit her eyes when Ezra transformed into Jane. It was something deeper, something hungrier. At first, Ezra didn't notice it. He was too caught up in the joy of their outings, the thrill of passing as Jane in public, and the comfort of having Claire as their confidant. But Madeline's touches lingered a little longer when she adjusted his wig, her fingers brushing his neck with a tenderness that felt electric. Her compliments grew more specific, her voice huskier when she murmured, "You look stunning, Jane," or "That dress hugs you perfectly." One evening, as they prepared for a quiet night in, Ezra stood before the full-length mirror in their bedroom, smoothing down a sapphire blue dress that clung to his frame. The wig he'd chosen tonight was a rich chestnut, falling in loose curls over his shoulders. He applied a soft layer of lipstick, the ritual soothing him as he watched Jane emerge in the reflection. Madeline stepped into the room, her hair still damp from a shower, wearing a simple silk robe that tied loosely at her waist. She paused in the doorway, her eyes locking onto Ezra, or rather, Jane, with an intensity that made his breath catch. "You're breathtaking," Madeline said, her voice low and warm. She crossed the room slowly, her bare feet silent on the hardwood floor, and stopped just behind him. In the mirror, Ezra saw her reflection as she reached out, her hands settling on his hips. The touch was familiar, yet charged with something new, something that sent a shiver racing up his spine. "Thank you, Maddie," Ezra replied. his voice softening into Jane's higher pitch. He turned to face her, expecting her usual supportive smile, but instead he found her eyes dark with desire. Madeline's hands slid up his sides, tracing the curve of the dress, and she stepped closer until their bodies were nearly pressed together. "I mean it," she whispered, her breath warm against his cheek. "There's something about you like this, Jane. It's different. It's intoxicating." Thanks for watching. The rest won't be viewable on YouTube, so check out Patreon if you want more. I hope you have a wonderful day, my cutie.